What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Lioneye Watch episode 9. And as always, I have my two co hosts with me. You guys want to say hello?
Hello.
Hello,
Hi.
everyone.
And as a special guest, we're happy to have Jonathan Rogers, lead technical director from GGG, to join us for a talk about his role as a developer for the team and then a lot of technical questions. Thank you for joining us tonight, Jonathan. How are you doing?
Hey, yes, very good. Thank you for having me.
We're happy to have you. So we're gonna jump straight into this, and I want to start with a question here. So, Jonathan, I'm curious. Can you walk us through the difference in designing Path of Exile from the small team that you started out with to the team you have now? You want to talk about that?
So, I mean, honestly, the biggest difference is that when you're a small team, everything is just really fast. Like if you make a decision and then you're like, oh yeah, let's just do that, and then someone does it, and then it's done. Like it's just really easy to and it honestly feels like you're making more progress than when you've got a big team. Like big teams can produce a lot of crap, but they also are extremely slow to do it. Like there's a massive pipeline.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, I mean, it is nice that I can go like, okay, we'll design like a league, and then at the end of the process, there's going to be like a ton of content in a modern league that we design. But it's like so hard to actually kind of take the ship and then turn it in a different direction when it's
Mm.
when it's rolling. So that's really the main difference. Is just like just the agility you get when you're small, and also honestly, like things are more fun in a smaller team just because you know everyone, you're friends with everyone. When a team starts to get big, it's like okay, there are people in this office I don't even really know.
Hmm.
There are probably some people I can't even remember the name of, which is
Yeah.
terrible to admit. But at least Chris knows everyone's names. I know that. Like
Yeah.
he's a much better boss than I am.
So, what do you
But
consider your team right now? Is it a small, large, medium?
Um,
What do you think?
you mean as a game company? Well, I mean, in
Yeah.
terms of the industry, it's only a medium team. But I
Hmm.
mean, in terms of how I feel about it, it feels absolutely enormous.
Yeah.
Like
Okay.
Are you
I'm
guys the
used to working.
biggest? Are you guys the biggest in New Zealand?
Yes, we are, I believe, just. There used to be a bigger studio, which was a Gameloft subsidiary, I guess you call it. So Gameloft had a studio in New Zealand, but unfortunately, the head office decided, or maybe it was something to do with that hostile takeover, I think that they had.
Hmm.
So anyway, the New Zealand studio closed down, and actually that ended up being. I mean, it's very unfortunate for all the staff because they had like 160 people or something like that, but. We actually got some really good hires out of that. And an example of that is Vincent, who's been working on all the performance work that we've been doing, was someone who worked for Gameloft, and we managed to snap him up, which was really good.
Hmm.
So that was that was pretty good for us at least. And like we have been expanding quite a lot recently. China has meant that we had to expand. The other thing as well is just the push for 300 is going to be really massive. There's a huge amount of content
Hmm.
there, so yeah. So that's basically why the team is getting so big.
With what you were discussing earlier, what was the kind of transitional number roughly when you
Well,
felt it switched from the small team mentality to the large team mentality for
so
GGG?
there's actually probably 2 points. I think one of them was around 20. That's the point where you go from everyone knows everything to now not everybody knows everything. So what I mean by that is like, okay, like generally speaking, in a room with 20 people in it, like everyone knows what everyone else is working on. You don't get any of that communication overhead you get here. Where I mean, like as you get larger, you get to the point where it's like, okay, people will just work on the wrong thing because nobody's told them that it's the wrong thing, and they, which the people, like the founders just don't know about it or whatever. And I mean, it's not really their fault. It's just the fact that you get lost to communication. That's like a
Hmm.
thing,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And I'd say that starts to happen around 20. And then I think around 50 is when the tone really changes because now you're getting to the past the point where you can really even know everyone really well.
Hmm.
Like you like when we were small and that, it's like, I know each of the people and what their strengths and weaknesses are, and if like I know if I ask X person to do this thing, then he's going to be the right person to do that and that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Once you get above that, it's kind of like okay, now we kind of have to rely on the structure more.
Yeah.
So I can't just walk up to an artist and go, hey, do X because he might have some other totally different priority based on some other part of the company. So I need to kind of go use go talk to Eric and then find out which guy it needs to be and blah blah blah, that kind of thing. So it's kind of just in terms of structural stuff, it just gets more like you have to start to be more official and do everything through like proper lines of communication, and it starts to turn into a company, right?
Yeah.
Just,
Full-
which I can't say is I particularly enjoy, but it has to be done.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, with that, how has your role changed, if at all, since you founded the company? Do you find yourself like delegating more tasks? Are you less hands-on, or are
Well,
you just
yeah.
taking stuff that just gets escalated to the highest role?
Well, so I mean, at the start, right, I literally wrote all the code because I was the only programmer, right? And then we hired programmers, and then we had to start dividing stuff up. So when I actually originally wrote a lot of the core systems, so like I originally wrote the renderer and the skill system and like stats and like the server of the backend and like kind of like you name it basically. The biggest system I didn't have any hand in at all really was the terrain generator. So that was handled pretty much entirely by Reese. I mean, I did obviously work with him a lot on design, but he's totally taken control of that from the beginning.
Hmm.
But now, of course, I can't really start new systems. And honestly, the main thing my role at this point is knowing how everything works. That's kind of the thing. Like, people need someone who kind of knows, like when they want to do X, like, where would I even start? Like, what area of the code am I even going to? So that's like kind of my main thing at this point. And so all day I'm getting people walking into my office, asking questions, which isn't really that conducive to doing long, hard projects. So it actually makes it quite hard for me to concentrate on something like, for example, like the whole desync fix thing. I would have been very difficult to do now for me because I just get so many people walking into my office every day, and that required like a serious amount of like face to the wall work.
So you have so much of the base information that since
Right.
everyone needs to go through you, you're going to be interrupted way too often to realistically handle one of those
Right.
projects.
I mean, there are still things that I do work on. So I mean, we haven't announced what this trade stuff we're doing is, but I am working on some trade improvements right now. And I still do mostly, I would say most of the work that I do personally these days is on the back end. We've only got one other back end programmer, and he's completely swamped with work for the China release.
Hmm.
So yeah, but back-end programmers have been very difficult because they have more than anyone else the ability to completely fuck up the realm. So basically they need to be 100% certain everything they're doing is good.
Could you elaborate a little bit more to help most people? Like, what does the back end programming entail, just
Right.
in
So
general, and
basically,
then GGG?
yeah. So basically, we have what you might call the front end, which is the place where all the gameplay happens. So that's in the parlance of Path of Exile, those are instance servers. So basically, that's the server that you play the actual game on. But behind all of those servers is what you call the back end, which is basically the database system, which has all of your like items and all that kind of stuff in it, as well as all the things like, so for example, like the party manager, the thing that handles like partying up, and there's like chat and guilds and basically all of those kind of features that require communication across different instances. Um, so that's basically what that stuff is. So like generally speaking, most of what you do when you're playing, like just fighting monsters and so on, doesn't touch the back end at all. Every now and then, there's a save which saves to the back end, which saves all of your progress
Hmm.
recently. And yeah, and basically, yeah, that's what the backend's all about. Which is true in most game companies, honestly. Like there's generally that thing, and you really don't want people connecting directly to your backend because that's a potential problem for security.
Security.
With having
Yeah.
having an extra layer between the back end and the front end is just really useful for preventing those kinds of any kind of security problems.
Are you saying it's not to your advantage if players can figure out exactly how items are generated and all that fun stuff?
Certainly, yeah. I mean, we have to be very careful about that kind of thing. One of the big things that I was really serious about when we started the company was security, because the economic security is a cornerstone of people's basically you're only going to value an item if you think that no one else can. I mean, if people are just duping uniques, then you're not going to value the uniques, right? So basically, if we want to instill in people the items are valuable, then we need to make sure the economy is very robust, and in order to prevent that, we have to make sure there aren't any economic exploits. So I mean, most of the time, the exploits we have are not so much like, which I'm pretty proud of, and not so much like dupe methods and things like that, but more along the lines of someone made a gameplay mistake, which leads to someone being able to farm something really efficiently or something like that. So I mean, there was that case recently where someone was, I can't remember the exact details, but it was something along the lines of there was some prophecy which like you could, I can't remember exactly, there was some way to get a drop from a prophecy more than once.
The Kitsugi one?
I don't remember the exact name of the stuff involved, but yeah, but basically there was a thing like that, and so that's the kind of exploit that those exploits are really hard to nail down, because they can be generated by gameplay programmers, whereas like things like dupe methods typically are more kind of like in the core, and we're looking more closely at that code.
Yeah.
So, and also the way that stuff's been architected is designed to be like as foolproof as possible for anyone interacting with it. So, like we're really careful about things like, so really common cases of exploits are when people are able to
roll back the servers, right?
Well, okay, that's a different class than what I was going to talk about. The rollback thing actually is only an issue if you can find out the result of something that you're going to make the decision about whether to roll back or not. So we actually inserted a save now in Chaos Orbs and Exalts and stuff like that. So you can't do rollback crafting anymore. And basically the cost there is like we're causing more server load by saving more often, but in response to but in exchange for that we have rollback protection against the really expensive crafting options.
I didn't actually know that was implemented. That's
that was done like might have been we don't really announce that kind of stuff. I mean, it's not actually it's only a problem if you're already exploiting the system, right?
But it's interesting.
So I mean that's one of those things that we it was a few months back, I think. Anyway, where was I? So that's one class is rollback stuff. But a huge class of exploits that we don't have is that people addressing things in the database that they shouldn't have permission to access. And the way that we do that is by making sure that every kind of query that you can do is always relative to your user. So to give you an example of that, rather than saying, I want to pick up item with ID 15, you say, I want to pick up onto my cursor the item with XY location, 57. Right, and it's very much harder for someone to exploit. In Diablo 2, for example, there were tons of exploits of that nature, where basically, for example, there were random things like, oh, you can buy an armor off someone else's body, that kind of stuff. Right? Like, there's really, really dumb stuff like that, and that's all because of the fact that they weren't being careful with their IDs. And making sure that you're only going to be able to address stuff that you're supposed to be able to address. So things like account IDs and item IDs and all that stuff, you never see any of that. You can never, it's not even in the protocol between the client and the server, because we want to be really careful about that kind of stuff. And that's one of the security layers that we have. And then, like an example of other security layers like that is like, you can't modify an item while it's on your body. Like in the back end, the way that an item is modified is it's lifted and then modified and then put back down again. And that's the sort of thing that prevents huge numbers of things. Like, in a lot of games you'll get problems where it's like, okay, you'll find some exploit that allows you to get an infinite amount of some particular stat because you've got some way of, fooling the thing into not removing the stat when, like only adding and not removing it when you have some interaction with the body. So that's the kind of thing that when we were starting the game, we were really, really careful to get all that stuff right and make sure that it just makes it really hard for another programmer to accidentally make a mistake that causes those kinds of issues. So I like to think we're pretty good on that front. But as I said, you still can kind of randomly get things like that case where you could get the double item drop and that kind of thing, because that's some gameplay programmer just didn't realize that was a possibility to res that guy and that kind of thing.
So with that, like with new leagues and a lot of new content, things slip by, like the series disfavorite card at the very beginning of the league, and like you guys said, you guys are very protective of that. And is it because of those things that those things slip, and are you expecting to lose sleep basically when a launch happens, because you're just anticipating Chris being like, Jonathan, we have a problem, fix it
absolutely,
right away.
Absolutely. So on the first day of a launch, we're extremely like we're monitoring the forums and Reddit as much as we can. The moment that something appears on the new queue with like that kind of someone talking about an exploit like that, we're like, okay, we need, and basically it helped a lot once we had the ability to deploy server-side hot fixes without restarting the realm, which we've had for quite a lot of years now. But before that point, it's like, okay, do we fix this kind of minor economic thing, or do we kick off the like 50,000 players who are online, or do we, or do we just, like, so yeah, you kind of got to make that kind of call. So it's much better now that we can just deploy stuff without having to worry about that at least. But yeah, it means that we can do pretty fast turnarounds. But it's annoying because once again, as the companies and the code base is getting bigger, it's getting harder and harder to get those fast turnaround times once again. I mean, like the compile times of the servers have started to go. Like a full recompile of the servers now takes around 3 hours. So like if there's a change to something that's used by a lot of things. So for example, if we add a stat that requires a nearly full recompile, because almost everything touches stats, like probably 90% of the code base is either touches stats or inherits from something that touches stats. So yeah, like that kind of thing takes 3 full hours to compile, just to compile.
And how would you compare that to the start when
well, I mean, it's just linearly scaled, right? So at the beginning it's like seconds, and then now it's hours. And it's kind of like something recently has really slowed down the compile times in Linux. So our servers run Linux, and on Windows the servers take quite a lot faster. So I think in Windows you can compile the servers in probably about half an hour. From scratch, maybe even less. On Linux, it's gone to about 3 hours. So yeah, it's we need to work on that. But I mean, this is just the constant struggle that we have. Like over time, everything like if you just leave it, everything will fall apart eventually. Like all of the assumptions that were made based on things of a smaller scale, and you just have to pretty much keep on continuously working at it and getting things faster. So at some point soon, we're going to probably declare that the build is taking this long is a bit of a crisis, and we need to move a bunch of engineers onto it to in order to work it out. And I'll probably walk out there and talk to Thomas, who's our server. I'm going to go, okay, you need to get the build done in 20 minutes. That's what I'll say. And then he'll be like, exactly. And then he'll eventually get there.
So then, with your security things that you've done, obviously they've overcomplicated something that would have been easy. Can you give us an example?
Well, I mean, well, an example I used before was the whole addressing of IDs thing. One complication there is on the client, you can't tell if an item is the same item as before. So to get you an idea of what I mean by that, it's like, okay, if you have any kind of interaction where it's like, okay, I want to do this thing to an item, and then after it's done, I want to like do something like, like put up a bit of UI or something like that related with regard to that item, because of the fact that the item has to be lifted and placed back down again, and because of the fact that there's no item IDs that are consistent, that means that all of the client has to go on is like, okay, I know there's an item that's in the same place that there was an item there before, but I don't actually know that it's technically the same item. So that's the kind of annoyingness that you get from having to like jump through those kind of hoops that were done in the name of security. So I mean, you can do sort of hacky things like, okay, is there an item in the same place that has the same item type? And that's like, okay, well, yeah, there is, but like I can't actually 100% certain that's the same item. So that's the kind of annoying thing that we get from the client side when you've got this on the server. We know that the item is the same item because on the server we have all of the IDs and everything, so we can do that kind of stuff. But certainly security makes things complicated. And the other thing as well is just when I'm working on any kind of system, it's like the initial version is like super easy and the code is really clean, and then you start to think about, okay, what can fail here and what do I have to do to prevent that, and or prevent the system getting into a bad state. And then by the time you finish handling all those cases, the code looks like an eldritch nightmare. It's kind of terrifying. Like and it really sucks doing just the kind of distributed system that we have with Path of Exile. Like it's not like there's just one server, one database server that the game runs on. It's like there's a collection of servers, and so when you've got a distributed system like that, there's 3 things that can happen with any operation. One of them is it could succeed and it succeeded. There's the case where it fails and it failed. And there's the case where it succeeded, but you thought it failed. And that's what happens when the message that comes back from the thing that told you it succeeded got lost. And that case there is what really keeps us awake at night, because when obviously the thing on the other end is going to now make decisions based on the idea that that failed, and so the whole thing just gets really nightmarish very quickly when you try to work out all of the repercussions of that, and and you have to work on back, and you have to think, oh God, this thing's going to happen this way, but if this thing succeeded but I thought it failed, then blah, it gets crazy. So that's the nightmare of distributed system programming.
So you mentioned a little bit earlier about desync, and when did you decide, or not necessarily you, but the company GGG, that this needed to be addressed, that it was kind of waiting too long?
I mean, we always kind of thought like this is a problem, but we kind of were of the mindset of like, we just need to kind of work around all the problems, and we just and it was kind of like we always had this kind of thought of like, in D2 they had the same model as we used to have before Lockstep. And it wasn't a problem back then, but I think that the reason why it wasn't a problem was actually to do with player expectations. Back then, when Diablo 2 came out, the expectation of network play was not the same as it is now. And so there basically came a point, and it was about 5 months, I think, before The Awakening came out, when I was like, okay, we're not going to be able to make progress going down the direction we're going down. We need like a massive change, and it's going to take a long time, and it's going to be horrible, and I'm going to have to store like a pile of other crap that I want to work on, but it needs to actually be, the network system needs to be rewritten from the ground up. And I think it took me about 3.5 months solid of work to get from the point where, I had the idea of, okay, why don't we literally just change our entire network model over from one thing to another, to the point where it was actually releasable into the beta of The Awakening. That was that was pretty crazy. I think that process was probably very important for us, because it really showed us the value of actually going back and fixing something the hard way. So in other words, like taking all the code we had and just re-engineering it completely, which is of course something we had to do again with the performance stuff we've been doing. In multiple ways. So I mean, the threading thing is like, that's pretty crazy. The amount of work that had to be done just to get to the engine to a state where we could do that. And of course, right now we've got a multi-engineer project of porting the game to 64-bit DX11. But really, the important thing is having the mindset of looking to the long term. So at the end of the day, I mean, you have to look at these games and think that, the games that we kind of work on and look at and say like, okay, well, these things last like, I mean, look at something like EVE Online, right? Where it's like they've been running for how long? Like a decade at least, like more than a decade, like 15. Is it even 15 years potentially? Like it's a very long time. And if we want to be able to, basically be in that category of game where we're an evergreen, continuing on forever kind of game, then we have to address these kinds of problems. And the earlier we fix them, the earlier, with the players, the more players will enjoy it. So
I mean,
basically, we've been.
I mean, there were people who would say, I'm not playing Path of Exile because there's desync in the game.
Exactly. And we basically wanted to make sure that there isn't going to be anyone, like put it this way, if you don't like the game, I want the reason you don't like it to be because you don't like the game as opposed to some technical problem. That's basically why we kind of had to make sure we're doing this sort of stuff. But it is slow, right? It takes a long time. And the really annoying part about it is that it seems like the problems gets worse while we're in the middle of solving it. There was a point there where the community was really complaining about performance a lot, and I'm like, man, we've got these like projects already. Like we already know about this. We're working on it. It really sucks that we can't like talk about what we're doing because, especially with performance, you can't promise anything you don't have working because you might get to the end and then just find that it doesn't actually work as well as you would thought. So I'm always really cautious about promising performance improvements, and especially because there's also this really annoying phenomenon that happens with performance improvements, where every change you make, it gets better for 95% of people and gets worse for 5% of people, and it's really annoying, honestly, and like it really sucks. And I think that when we first did some of these changes, we really had to just deal with the fact that it's going to be a bit like that, and then we can sort of clean up the 5% afterwards, because we just can't possibly know what problems a given like a given person's machine is going to have, and people have some really seriously terrible computer issues that they, and the problem is as well is that they'll be like, oh, it's fine in every other game, and it's like, well, okay, yeah, I mean, that might be very well true, right? Like, some other game might just not happen to stress the exact same components or whatever that we do. But also, they may have then gone through the gauntlet of finding out that everyone has this problem and then fixing it afterwards, So, yeah, I mean, that's the real challenge with that stuff.
Well, you brought up DirectX 11, and that was something we wanted to talk about. So I think that segues into a question for lifting, and we should get that out of the way because chat's really excited.
Well, I was very curious about with Act 5. No, PT. Actually, you asked this because I want to save this.
Oh, all right. So
I butchered that. I completely butchered that, didn't
Yeah, Act 5. What? All right. You mentioned the DirectX 11, the 64-bit client, right? And it's going to change the performance improvements. So, what do you want to say about DirectX as of now? What should players be able to expect? And, what should the 5% that their performance is going to get worse expect?
Well, I really hope we don't get too many of those people. But yeah, so DX11, the main benefit of it, like technically, is that the performance of the actual API on the CPU side is improved. So that is to say that the time that the engine spends telling the graphics card what to do will be reduced. And currently, that's about 50% of the total time the client spends doing anything. So about 50% of the time is spent telling the GPU what to do, and 50% of that time will be gone after we go to DX11. So that makes, if you're counting the frame rate, about 25% faster. Or I mean, so graphics programmers never think about things in terms of FPS. They always look in terms of frame time. So if your frame time was 10 milliseconds before, now it's 7.5 milliseconds, and then you can work out what the frame rate is from that. So that's kind of what we're getting right now. However, there are in DX11 more ability to use multi-threading within the render itself. So right now we have multi-threading in all of the code that we run CPU side. So that is to say stuff like particles and animation and trails and that kind of stuff, like all of the kind of graphical effects that we simulate on the CPU. But under DX11 you can actually have multiple threads that are rendering at the same time. On the GPU, usually they won't actually be rendering at the same time. But the thing is that it's the CPU side. It's the telling the GPU what to do part. So, for example, we'll be able to render shadows concurrently with other shadows, and we'll be able to render like certain parts of the scene that are rendered to sort of temporary buffers. So, for example, a bunch of our particles render to a different resolution than the rest of the scene. So we'll be able to render those particles at the same time we're rendering like some other parts of the scene and so on. Like basically, we can just look at all the different parts and what the dependencies are, and then we can work out what parts of these can we do at the same time, and then we can do all those parts at the same time. So basically, there's going to be more multi-threading in the engine, and I'm hoping. I mean, I know Vincent is always like, yeah, I want to get to 2x, right? Like every time we do a performance improvement, he's like, I want to double the frame rate. Obviously under certain situations. Yeah. But I don't know if we'll get there. But as I said, right now we're kind of like I suppose you call it 1.5x if you 25% shorter frame time, which means 1.5. Or wait, is that right? No, I'm sorry. I'm doing the math wrong, but whatever. In any case, we've cut about 25% off the frame time right now, and I think we can do better than that once we get the multi-threading working. Actually, there's quite a lot of improvements to the multi-threaded system as well as the DX11 port. So that'll probably come out in 2.4.3 as well. So he's really packed those threads tight. Like I don't know if you guys saw the performance video I did. with where I talked about the multi-threading of the frame. One thing that in that video with the performance profiler was there was a lot of gaps between each of the different stages of doing the threading, and so he's managed to get a pretty large performance improvement from just working on that system over time and getting all the threads packed together. So your CPU, it'll consume a lot more CPU. Like basically more of your CPU will be able to be used is the thing, right? Like currently, if we can use, I don't know, I'm just pulling this number out of my ass, but if we can currently use 60% of your CPU, then maybe that number's going up to 90% of your CPU after after the change. Yeah. So once again, those numbers are just fabricated. I don't know what the actual numbers are, but that's the kind of thing we're talking about, right? And that translates to we're getting more work done faster, so your frame rate goes up.
So for players who are having issues right now with performance in the game, what's your advice? What should they do? What do they need to upgrade the most?
Well, it really depends. It really depends on what is slow, and I think we actually need to maybe do some improvements on servicing that information to the player, because right now people are very confused about is it? So just to give you examples of different things it can be, right? So one thing is stuttering from loading assets that aren't loaded. So that would be what you might call a cache miss. So basically, we went to go to get a resource and we found, hey, look, it wasn't actually loaded, and we thought it was supposed to be loaded. And then you have to load it off the disk. So basically, ideally, you would never ever have to hit the disk during gameplay at all. Or rather, it would only happen in the background. You never have to wait for the disk. Unfortunately, there are cases where just due to either preloading mistakes or, for example, there was a video on Reddit, might have been yesterday, where someone was playing the Hall of Grandmasters, and they had a massive lag spike, and that there was almost certainly hitting the disk for an asset that should have been loaded and wasn't. So we've got code that's supposed to load all the stuff that the Grandmasters need, but apparently it isn't working. There's obviously a mistake there, and so I'll put an engineer on that, and he'll fix it. But we actually do need to fix some stuff with the Hall of Grandmasters anyway. There's a few issues with loading there that we need to sort out. But regardless, that's one type of issue. That's the one where I think we've made the most strides. We made a lot of strides in that during the 2.3.0 release cycle. So 2.3.0 came out, and it wasn't totally. There was a lot of problems still when 2.3.0 came out, but after a few patches of 2.3, I think that we mostly got that sorted out. So I don't think that's a huge problem anymore. The other thing that people often mistake for performance problems is honestly just network lag. When you're in lockstep, if you have a hiccup to the server in some place between you and the server, then that looks like a freeze, because obviously the simulation freezes. The way you can actually tell that that's like that, and that is a lockstep lag frame rather than another thing, is that all the particles will keep moving. Well, actually, no, the particles don't move, but the effects on the particles. So, for example, there's kind of these wobbles and other random stuff. When we do, how when we do
your aura's rotating around you would be a good sign.
Yeah, that's exactly. So anything that's done or on the GPU, any kind of vertex shader effect will keep running, and so that basically what it looks like is when we do the pausing in our trailers that we do, where there's some stuff that's kind of moving still. That's what it looks like, and in fact, the way that we implement that, by the way, I should mention, is we literally just pause, we just freeze the server, and then the fact that then the lag causes the client to just stay frozen like that. So it's literally simulating the exact thing that happens if you get network lag.
That's creative thinking, man.
So Shaper is the lag boss. Confirmed.
Yeah, basically. Nice. It's funny how Lockstep actually gave us the ability to freeze the simulation. Actually, that turned out to be really useful for debugging, actually, because when you're running a debug build, you can actually press equals, and it will freeze the simulation, and so you can just see it. And then actually, if you go control equals, then it will move forward frame by frame, and you can just inspect things very slowly. Anyway, but I have totally forgotten what I was talking about. Oh, that's right. Yeah. So a lot of people mistake that for lag. Yeah. And for frame rate issues. And the thing is, especially if you've got kind of a juddering performance where you've got a very uneven ping, and it can feel like the game is lagging.
Mm.
And honestly, a lot of the reason for that is just people have bad connections via wireless. Like it's just a huge percentage of people that approach customer support and say they have this kind of problem. We tell them, "Can you try with a cable?" And they're like, "Oh yeah, it's fine now," because people just have crappy wireless setups in their homes, and that's kind of really unfortunate.
So yeah, sometimes during the beginning of a league, especially or only if you're playing with lockstep, it feels like you're having FPS drops. What is that? Is that in relation to that?
As I said, that people do feel that stuff can be FPS drops sometimes. I don't think it should be related to the beginning of the league. I mean,
I was just thinking maybe server overload or something like that.
Well,
connection.
So with regard to servers, we have a very strict limit on the number of instances that can go on a given server. Like it's not like a lot of people think that it's just like, oh, the like the people just pile into the servers and then it gets slower and slower and slower. But that's not really how it is. Like we know exactly how many instances can go into a server before there are performance problems. And then we load exactly that number on, and no more will go on once it hits that number. So if that starts happening, then actually the players will start getting the error, which is I actually don't remember what exactly the text of it is, but basically you can't join new areas once that happens, and also then of course they've got the login queue at the start. So it shouldn't really ever be the case that you start to get those kinds of issues. That being said, I mean, there's always could be bugs, right? And also performance sometimes regresses, like especially when there's a big expansion that changes a lot of tech stuff, but I mean we monitor that stuff and then we try to fix those performance problems. But I do think But that being said, I do think the next big performance push will actually be server side, and that's going to fix a lot of the problems that you get with things like there's that map mod which makes it so that everything gets charges, like frenzy charges, every X amount of seconds. That's the kind of thing that has like massive and the reason why you get lag there is entirely because the server is recalculating stats on all the monsters on literally the entire level. And that introduces lag, and this is one of those things where it's like we need to speed up the performance of stat recalculation, and that will fix like a pile of things, including players when they join. There can be a little lag sometimes when a new player joins the instance, and that's because it's calculating all the stats of the player and that kind of stuff, right? So basically, and then of course there's the infamous minion stat recalculation problem. That was a problem. Once again, I can't remember what the unique was called, but there was a unique that
Femur of the Saints.
Yes, I believe it was that one. Yeah, exactly. So basically, that's the kind of thing where, once again, stat recalculation is our bane on the server, and it causes performance problems on the client. And before we had lockstep, you wouldn't even notice that kind of thing because it would just be lag that would be absorbed into the, and it would cause desync, but it wouldn't cause obvious lag. And sometimes we could get away with that. And with lockstep, we can't get away with it. You need to absolutely process every frame within 33 milliseconds, or you're causing lag on the client.
Well, to give you a little bit of a difficult question, sorry, Hedgie, because it was related to the femur of the saints. Why do you skills like this happen? You know that's an issue, and when we see like extra gore on Blade Vortex and the femur of the saints stuff, it's not, to the people who've been paying attention, they know that high calculations with mob hitting is quite problematic. So why do these things get designed?
Well, okay, so I can't necessarily talk for the designers, but what I can tell you is that they're always trying to push the boundaries, number one. And number two is that when QA tests them, they don't always have their eye on performance as much as they should, and they don't necessarily... I mean, look, they try to test extreme cases, but sometimes the players just come up with more extreme cases than we can imagine as well. So, I mean, okay, when you're talking about extra gore on what's it called, Blade Vortex...
or anything.
Well, okay. Well, first of all, extra gore has been in the game for a very long time, right? When extra gore was added, we had not nearly the ability to have the attack speeds that skills can have today. And unfortunately, I mean, the designers often aren't thinking about things like extra gore because it's a microtransaction when they're designing a skill. They just want to make the skill as they make it, and they'll make it and they'll test all the gameplay stuff, consequences of it. They're not thinking, oh yeah, extra gore is going to make this terrible. And the correct solution there is for us to just fix things like that from becoming points of causing lag in the first place. It sucks. I understand, right? Like it's a pain. And that's just one of those cases where there's things. I mean, like honestly, if if I could halve everyone's attack and cast speeds, I would totally do that because like everything in the game that is bad scales with attack and cast speed. Like it's like server lag is like like basically the amount of hits that people can do now per second is just. If you'd have told me 5 years ago how that would have gotten, like I would have probably not even architected the system like it is now. Like there's so much, it takes a. Yeah, people have way too fast attack and cast speed, and I sometimes say to Chris, like, what if we literally just said one day, okay, we're gonna make the next league, we're just gonna have a mod in it, which is just half attack and cast speed, and just see what happens. But like honestly, I don't think we could do that just because players would be
Shield ground temp chain league, guys, incoming.
It's one of those things that's annoying. But I mean, as the technical director, it's my job to basically take what the designers make and then make it work. So basically, we have been getting these things better. And then of course, but I mean, Blade Vortex was out of control though, right? Like Blade Vortex was actually out of control, so they had to change it to have less stacks. That was crazy.
Yeah,
and then once again, the case of the way that we changed what do you call them? Cast on X skills. The changes we made there. Cast on crit, but also cast on
melee
not damage taken, but all the other ones that weren't the outgoing, the things you could control the speed of. That stuff was motivated mostly by performance because creating so many skills in one frame. Normally a player can only do one skill per frame. That's like an actual rule. The server runs at 30 frames a second and you can only do 30 skills a second. Though that does, if you've got multi-strike and stuff, that can happen. That can happen in one frame. So like one actual invocation of a skill per server frame. And so having the ability to create so many player skills in one frame with cast on crit was just a nightmare. And it was causing massive server-side lag and all that sort of stuff. It was like just a huge pain. So that was a huge part of the motivation for changing the way cast on crit works, so that it spreads it out over several frames, so that they've got, you don't have so much crap happening in one time. So that's what was going on there.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of choke in the. I don't know if it's the network problem, but when you encounter the Undying mod and you don't manage to kill it and you just attack into it, let's say like a Slayer who has AoE that's constantly recalculating.
Right. Yeah, so those are the kinds of things we're really interested in. And as I said, I think the next big performance push is going to be server-side performance. So I'll stick Vincent on that after he's done, after we're done with the current batch. So yeah, I mean, as I said, like as soon as DX11 client is out, I think we'll start looking at that a lot more seriously. It will help a lot.
In regards to CPU that you were mentioning earlier, do you guys actually collect hardware data to see like what kinds of players with what kinds of hardware that
we actually did start doing that fairly recently. I think it was probably 2 months ago, and honestly I haven't actually looked at the data too much since then. We added it because we wanted to see what the effect of the multi-threading was. So it must be a bit longer than that actually, because we've had the multi-threading in for longer than that. But it was added around the same time we added the multi-threading, because we wanted to see the difference between people who had it on versus had it off, and basically just collect some data around that and what the frame rates were and so on. And we also added collection for what CPU and GPU you have in order to basically. So the main reason we do that is because we want to see. We only want to know, like to compare results, we need to know that the person have the same hardware. So what we want to do is go like, okay, this guy with a with this graphics card and the CPU had this thing, and the guy with the same GPU and CPU had this performance. And the annoying part is that there's actually a huge amount of variability just from people's like things like just having a virus checker installed is like something that like can randomly cause performance, and then God forbid you have multiple virus checkers installed and they're fighting with each other. Like that's the kind of thing you get, and that's when you can start to get really bad IO performance. And honestly, I don't understand how there are people who seem to be able to have like multiple second long, like you go to the disk and it takes like multiple seconds to get a single file off the disk. Like I don't understand how someone has a system that can possibly be that slow. But while still having a very fast graphics card and CPU. Like I honestly I don't understand it sometimes. Sometimes I sometimes cry honestly at the at the ridiculous performance problems that some people seem to be able to have. And I just don't understand it.
Well, my last major death, I want to point out, I have a solid state drive GTX 970, and I think I had a good 4-second freeze against a warband pack for the beacon.
Well, okay, but was that server side or client side though? Because
I don't know.
Right, exactly. So I mean, this is the thing, right? And so what I want to do actually, and this is actually the thing I really want to do, is add stuff to the client so that we'll tell you what type of freeze you're having right now. So, for example, I want like an icon of a disk that flashes up if we're waiting on disk, and I want an icon of a network socket if we're waiting on network.
I would really like that.
Exactly. So I've been meaning to do it for a long time, and it really wouldn't be that hard. It's just it's kind of been gone by the wayside, unfortunately. But I really do want to add that, and that will mean that it's also once we do that, then we can add that information about how long people have freezes for to the telemetry we're taking from the client, and that means we can start to think about, okay, are there specific areas that the people are getting disk freezes on? Are there specific, or network freeze and that kind of stuff, right? Basically, just getting more data about what causes it, and then we can start to work more on.
And you basically have a system that says, guys, it's your shitty system that's the cause of this. This is not our fault.
But the thing is, look, if everyone gets the same problem on the same area, then we start to know, okay, this is on us, we have to solve this kind of thing. Whereas if it's like just a general background radiation, then it's like, well, or if it's just one guy who gets it all the time, or like, whatever, certain people, then, you've got to
and it saves you diagnosis time. You don't have to spend your time looking and confirming that it's your issue.
So I would like to get more telemetry there, but it's always hard. I mean, as I said, like with a company this size, you just have a lot of like I set the DX11 port rolling, and then that takes like a long time to kind of filter out of the system before we can start working on new systems. And I should mention as well with DX11, by the way, is that one thing we've really noticed is that there's way less mysterious graphics driver freezes with DX11. And mysterious graphics driver freezes aren't long. They're like in the order of 5 milliseconds, but they cause the stuttering frame rate that really suck, especially when entering. The thing we really noticed was shaders. Every time you load a shader, especially on ATI cards, you just get mysterious freezes of about 5 milliseconds. And if your frame time is like 15 milliseconds, right? And then 16 is the cutoff for 60 FPS. Then you have a 5 millisecond freeze, and then you're just dropping down to 30, just like micro stutters. So this micro stuttering problem seems to have gone away with DX11, which I'm really happy about. So I think DX11 will help a lot with that too. I think people are going to be really happy with that.
Well, I wanted to ask this question, and it's mainly regarding the network code and server-side controls, but a lot of hardcore players, they're willing to deal with a lot of the imperfections within, the crashing and the freezing. Are there any issues with giving players control with their disconnect time to the server? When you're no longer sending packets. Currently, we've tested it. It's like 8 seconds.
I understand. I think it's actually. I thought it was 6, but I could be wrong. Maybe it is 8, but I'm pretty sure it was 6. But in any case, let me tell you the problem with this, right? So. If we give you the ability to set that really low, then all the streamers will do it, and then the streamers will tell all the players, hey, you should do this, and then all the players will do it, even though their connections aren't up to it, and then they'll continuously get disconnected, and then they'll bitch at us. And this is honestly the problem, is it entirely comes down to player psychology of, like, if you give someone a lever, and all the hardcore people, and like all the highest level people are pulling that lever, then they will influence the community to all pull it as well.
Are you now placing the blame on us, the streamers?
Well, I mean,
you're the.
I'm not saying that. Like, what I'm saying is, like as much as anyone will say, hey, set this lower if your connection is good enough that you don't have drop packets and stuff like that. People just will not listen. They'll be like, but like, this guy does it, so why shouldn't I be able to do this and that kind of thing. And so basically, it'll just increase the amount of disconnections significantly. Yeah. And that's kind of a thing that sucks. And I can understand the frustration, and we've talked in the past, like maybe on hardcore we should lower the time and that kind of stuff. Chris, I know, has a somewhat of a D2 style attitude to this, which is, in D2, if you're playing hardcore, you just make sure you never put yourself in a situation where 6 seconds of lag is going to kill you.
That's called offline mode.
That's his attitude about this, I know. Although, which of course I know isn't really particularly satisfactory. I mean, Chris and hardcore, honestly. In fact, I'll tell you what, Chris and D2. the dirty secret about Chris playing hardcore in D2 was that he never actually did any damage. Like he would stand there in a party and effectively just be leeching. He looks like he's attacking, but he's spec'd entirely into life and not damage at all, and he's just leeching for everybody. You know, like Chris is the most paranoid person in hardcore. Like he specs defensive.
Yeah, you know what's actually funny is I asked Chris when he was playing hardcore last league to link me his gear, and he linked me his gear. He was using like a one-handed mace, and he was playing Cyclone sword and board, and I was like, oh my god, he must be doing no damage.
He only cares about defensiveness. He's like ultimately paranoid about dying. So yeah.
In a bit, Jonathan is mysteriously going to disappear from this podcast. Oh well.
So that you were talking a little bit earlier about some of the shortcuts, or not necessarily the shortcuts, the attack speed in the current game and how you would have done things differently in your original design. So what are some of the shortcuts or the design implementations that you did early on that, let's say, you don't necessarily regret, but you didn't expect the game to be where it is and it's causing some massive problems?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would definitely say that most of those problems are just caused by things scaling to a level that we never really expect. So, I mean, yeah, attack speed is a really great example of that. If I was starting again, I would definitely put way more controls on giving out attack and cast speed. One of the things that actually really annoys me about it as well is that it looks really dumb when you see a high-level person playing, just to someone who doesn't play Path of Exile. Like, if you show a new player, oh, this is Path of Exile, and they're sitting there with like 30 attacks and going blah, 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 and it's like, okay, this doesn't look reasonable. Like, it just doesn't. And then we actually have this problem on press tours as well when we want to show journalists. Like, they're not going to understand these crazy it's we're doing the Atlas, right? Like, like I was like, okay, I need builds that don't have ridiculous attack speed in order to actually show journalists, right? Because like it looks ridiculous. Like we need to, so that's the thing that's really annoying.
So that's why Earthquake is the strongest melee skill, because it doesn't do the cha-cha when it attacks.
It is true that we got that we used Earthquake in the press tour videos a lot because it was a in-game build that didn't rely on huge attack speed. I mean, you still have like pretty fast attack speed, but it isn't like crazy like it can be with some of those builds. So it is an annoying thing. I mean, look, there are things that are probably just. I mean, there were moments in the past where we had forks in the road, right? Like, I mean, obviously one of the big things is the skill tree, where I personally really love the fact we've got this giant skill tree, which is really awesome, and but I mean, it does do to some extent scare off new players, right? Like that is an unfortunate thing, and it annoys me a little bit because I think that the scariness of the tree is not really real. Like it's more perceived than it is actual, because I mean it's really complicated in that you can make like really complicated builds, but you don't have to do that to like play like your first character, right? Like you just play and allocate stuff, right? And like you can like people have this mindset of like, okay, if I see a tree like that, I need to absolutely look up a build. Like I'm not going to do this myself. I don't trust myself, whatever. And I really wish that people weren't like that. So that's unfortunate. So like we actually had this idea when we were still in closed beta. I think we were thinking maybe we could change the tree so that it's not all available initially. Like it wasn't. We were sort of thinking maybe we could have it so it's like it's locked and you have to unlock parts of it. And so as you play, Atlas. Yeah, kind of like that. And so this would be a thing where it's like in order to play a certain way, you might need to do some various, maybe I think initially we were thinking like, what if there were like achievements of some kind where you unlock this achievement, unlocks as part of the tree. So each part of the tree has like a thing in it where it was like, do this thing, like this goal, and then this unlocks as part of the tree or whatever. And so that would mean that, so basically the idea was that for new players, you wouldn't be able to see the whole tree. So it would be less scary at the start. Because what you'd see is kind of just the nearest goals that you had to sort of unlock more of it. But then we kind of thought like the problem is that players will just go online and they'll see what the whole tree is and they'll still want to do the build, only now they won't be able to do the build they want to do because now they've got to do some random challenges they don't want to do or whatever. Like, so that was kind of the reason we didn't go that route. But that's the kind of thing we're looking back. It's like maybe that would have been cool. I don't know. Like maybe the whole thing would have played out differently. But I don't know. It's still an interesting idea, but obviously we can't change it now. Like that would be something like we obviously can't restrict the tree right now that people go crazy.
Well, if you want everybody to leave.
yeah, I know exactly.
And
maybe, and I'm not saying that was necessarily a good idea. It's just an interesting story about stuff that we thought about in the past.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we wanted to. Do you have a question, Lifting?
I just wanted to follow up on that. So, because of that, you've mentioned stuff that you've been wanting to do. Do you feel like your programming team, does it feel understaffed in that department, in that regard? Are there like stuff you would really like to do but you can't do because of the size of your team, or?
Well, most of those things are not really gameplay things. They're more like technical fixing, right? Like, I mean, we've talked a pile about things that I would, that I would like to do to fix in terms of performance stuff, and that's all just manpower.
Okay.
I don't necessarily think that just adding more programmers would fix that, though. Like, the problem is that every programmer you add, like, if I just added 10 programmers immediately, then it would be a nightmare. Because they all wouldn't know the code base, right? And also, like, I'd have all these people training, like, and basically when someone's a new programmer, they have to come to me more often, and so I'd be sitting there trying to train 10 people when I don't have the time to do that. So we kind of need to add programmers slowly. They need to get on board with the code base and sort of understand how things work and so on. And then after about 6 months, or maybe even a bit longer than that, that's the point where they actually know enough that they don't need much help.
Okay.
So you really have to get programmers on board slowly. And I think when Gameloft folded in New Zealand, we hired like a bunch of programmers all at once, and so that was really tricky to get everyone integrated. And now we've kind of got that. Now they're all kind of in very well, and like everything's going really smoothly. But that kind of thing is really tough. So that's why we can't just like say, oh yeah, let's hire 10 more programmers, we'll fix everything. Just because like they won't be able to fix stuff without help. Like I can't just get a programmer off the street and say, hey, like, fix server side lockstep lag. Like they'll be like, what? They don't understand. Right? They need like someone. Like they need a lot of help and direction. So as I said, the big things are technical. I think in terms of gameplay, we mostly, I would say, so I mean, we design like an expansion. And we design all the gameplay stuff that needs to happen in that expansion, and then that stuff, because that is what the expansion is according to the players, that stuff tends to take a bit more priority, the game systems. And so I think that we pretty much always deliver the gameplay code that we want. We've got 4 gameplay programmers, and they I think it's 4. Let me just think. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's 4. And they're full time just adding stats and stuff like that. So like there's a huge amount of that stuff that gets added. What was that, sorry?
Mark is the lead of that team, right?
Yes, he is. Mark 1.
In regards of expansions, we're well aware Act 5 is coming along. Are you guys planning on running a prolonged beta like you did with Act 4?
Absolutely. And the reason why is because I know you've got I knew Chris told me beforehand, like he's going to care about the prolonged beta thing. But here's the thing, right? Honestly, 3.0 is so crazy. The amount of shit that's going on in 3.0, I just I'm obviously I can't say anything about it, but man, the amount of content and stuff that's happening there is very high, and we just couldn't do it without a beta. So we've already talked about how crawl is not a thing.
Yeah. You want to add anything about that?
I don't want to add about that. No.
Are you sure?
I'm absolutely sure. But it's like even just something like that, like. When you screw around with the leveling curve and like it screws up the balance in ways that are really hard to predict. And so I mean, just from a balance perspective alone, but I mean, yeah, there's tons of, there's a lot of relaying out of everything that has to happen in order to add an act and remove difficulty and stuff like that. And so that's a pain. But also there's just lots of other features and stuff, that are going to be a big. And then the other thing as well is that one thing that would be crappy if we did deploy Act 5 right into the production realm. Mm-hmm. People would finish it in standard with like a level 100 character in like 15 minutes or something like that. They just literally rush through, through Silver Flask,
Nice.
and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, was that Act 5? It's shitty, right?" You know, like people would just be like, "Seriously." Someone would do it immediately, and like we were able to avoid that with the Shaper fight, because it was actually just hard enough that at least took a couple of days before someone had really.
You're like,
really
it took 2 days. Win,
Yeah,
guys.
exactly.
Well done.
Exactly. No, seriously, exactly. That is a win. That is actually a win. But for Act 5, obviously, you could just go to normal Act 5 and play like with a playthrough with a level 100 character in like 15 minutes, and then that's not an experience. That's not the experience that I want to see on stream on day one. With like, you know, that is one advantage of doing a beta, is at least we get to see people play through the content properly.
Well, you could piss everybody off and make it so that you disable the permanent links for a month.
Well, you know, that's actually, we seriously, okay, when we were discussing the Act 4 launch, we seriously considered that as an option.
I would just love to see the ramifications of that.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, I shouldn't have said seriously, because it was never really serious, but we actually did discuss that as an idea. Yeah, there you go. Anyway.
Well, what is something you learned about the 2.4, or sorry, not the 2.4, the 2.0 Act 4 launch with the beta that's going to make the process smoother? I'm going to hate the beta no matter what. I can live with that. Is it going to be a smoother process?
So I mean, I suppose that depends on your perspective. I mean, one thing I want to definitely do is add more integration between the beta and non-beta realms. More of your more things that you would want to be shared between the two realms are shared.
Okay.
That's one thing. And the second thing as well is that people had problems with services being unavailable in the beta. Certain things like stuff to do around trade and stuff like that, and that kind of stuff, you know,
and microtransactions.
Yeah, exactly, and microtransactions and stuff like that. I think that we'll do better next time. We will, basically by adding more realm integration, so they're not quite so separate. We can make it so that, we'll put it this way: wouldn't it be nice if the items in the beta realm just showed up as a different league according to the public item tracker?
Definitely.
Right, that's what I'm talking about. Like stuff like that. Like just making sure that, like, you're not missing out on stuff like that.
Sorry, continue.
So I mean, like that sort of stuff. I think we'll be able to do better. And the reason why it was kind of like that on the other realm is that they really were separate realms with a terrible hack in order to get the accounts to be the same. And I think we'll probably be able to do a bit better next time.
Did you mention if it was going to be a closed or an open beta?
Closed. Yeah.
Closed. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. The feedback we get on closed betas is much better.
And are we talking like in the same duration as the one we saw for?
I can't really predict the duration. I know that we're hoping for it to be a bit shorter.
Yeah.
But I mean, ultimately, the reason why the beta for Act 4 was so long is the game wasn't finished. We had to finish the Malachite fight and all that stuff at the end there. Yeah. And so I mean, I honestly, I hope that everything is just completely finished by the time we head into the beta. Like, reality is that that's never the case. I'm sure there'll be stuff that isn't done. So it's going to depend a little bit on that. But I mean, we have a bigger team now. We can produce content way faster. This expansion, 3.0 will be a much bigger expansion than 2.0 was. And there'll be much more.
That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, we'll consider the team size, right? Right now we have 90 people. The team size when we launched 2.0 was, how much was it? I don't know. Was it 50 maybe?
Okay.
I don't even remember. Like, I mean, it's a lot smaller. So I mean, just consider that, right? Yeah, there's a lot more going in.
I did want to say that we have reached about the hour mark, which is all we had, promised of your time. Did you want to do a little bit more?
I can do a little more. Sure, why not?
Okay. I'm going to throw you a wild card. See if you're willing to ask this, because do you do anything in terms of like backend with the microtransaction stuff at all?
So you're asking. Okay, so I did originally do the backend for microtransactions, and I will say we are planning on completely replacing the way that the microtransactions dash works. That is a project. That is a project that I have. It is a project that I have for. It's not gonna be soon. I'm gonna warn you that it's probably
Okay.
next year. Next
right.
year, probably. I mean,
Tentatively.
I'm hoping quarter 1, but like once again, this hasn't even started, right? So like, I
Yeah.
can't make any promises about timeline. But yes, I understand the microtransaction stash is shitty, and we're gonna fix it. So like, I mean, it's because we never really thought. Once again, it's a scaling thing, right? Like we never really realized the amount of microtransactions people would get, and like just the way things would evolve and so on. And so like the microtransaction stash is completely fine when all you have is one tab, right?
Yeah.
Like it's not a problem in that situation. It's and the thing is as well. Okay, modern games, when you buy things like mystery boxes and stuff like that, they all have like way more stuff going on with the shop. Of like, oh, being the chest opens up and you get all animations and stuff like that. Like, we really need to get with the times and kind of get all that sort of stuff going. Just the experience of using the shop. It's kind of ridiculous that for the thing that we make our money from, we spend like the least time working on it.
So I will
think-
agree. It is a bit
Yeah,
ridiculous.
it is
a bit
kind of
ridiculous.
weird.
But I mean, look, that's honestly because we prioritize gameplay, and that's kind of always been our company's thing. Is we always prioritize the game over the monetization model. So it's a good thing that you guys are actually paying us money, because that actually does keep us alive. So
Well, the reason I brought it up, it was an interesting point when you talked about that they were different servers before, or different instances entirely with no connection when you had the beta. When one thing was weird to me is like, you have new people playing the beta.
I understand, and they don't have the ability to
can't
access
have
to. Yes, I know. No,
Yeah.
that was a terrible thing. That was a terrible thing that we basically said, look, we don't have a way of doing this. And the reason why is because microtransactions are currently stored in the items database.
Okay.
Because they're basically just requested at the same time you get all of the items in your stashes and stuff like that. They're just a stash full of items, except that you can't like move them around and stuff. And so what that means is, because the items database was completely separated in the beta, basically we just all of those tables to do with character data were all separated out. The microtransactions couldn't be shared between them. Unfortunately. So that was a thing. Whereas the new model for microtransactions, I mean, I really shouldn't talk too much about this, because once again, it's the case we don't want to promise anything that we don't before it's actually implemented. But my ideal model is where you don't really microtransactions won't really be items in the same way other items are. They'll be like a thing on your account. You have this, and then you can apply it to an item. Like, in fact, we might even get to the point where it's like you apply it to your body armor slot rather than to an item, and that way you can, when you change body armors, it's still like the microtransaction just
Still
stays
in
on
the
the slot.
slot. Yeah.
Exactly. So that would be
Holy shit, I would love that.
that would be a lot better, right? Like, and that would be a lot better. So I mean, that's once again, I like this is far away. Like like
Nonsense. This is just spitballing ideas. No promises are being made.
I mean, I'm gonna I'm gonna put if it the soonest that will happen, if it would be 300. So yeah, like maybe it will happen then. We'll see. It's definitely something I want to fix. Put it that way.
I'm just waiting to hear about Chris yelling at you now at the end of this. Because
Yeah.
Currently not in his office, so he can't hear me.
You'll find out in a few hours.
Yeah,
He's furiously
but yeah,
driving that out.
one day. I mean, he knows. I mean, look, we are planning on doing that. So like, I just hope that we'll get time for 300 releases. But yeah.
How
So
do you
with-
do a priority? Oh, sorry, Hedgie, go for it.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask about like the priority. Like, how do you just determine and decide, what power gets put where? Like with the DX11 coming out, once that's done, what's next on the docket? And does stuff like this, like the overhauls and just overall enhancements to the game, does that push back, really janky ideas of content or new systems, essentially? Does that?
Well, I would say that we have different programmers working on different things. Like we've got 3 programmers working on the engine, and they're unlikely really to be moving over to gameplay once they're done. So I suspect it's kind of going to be a case of them just continually working on improvements and so on. People definitely have special areas. I mean, the gameplay programmers work on gameplay, and the graphics programmers work on graphic stuff. And so I think you'll start to see, and we actually have already some of the stuff in progress, but I'm not going to talk about it. You'll start to see some pretty cool engine tech features after the performance stuff has been dealt with. I mean, we're going to have some graphics programmers lying around at that point who we can use. Like I want to really start working on there's some really basic stuff we could just add in, like features that you could just turn on, like SSAO, and maybe like better lighting things and stuff like that, like just cool stuff like that. That'll be cool to work on. And so you'll start to see that kind of stuff, I suspect. Those programmers just don't know about gameplay, and teaching them about gameplay would take another 6 months again. Like
Yeah.
It's a
it
specialization.
really is specialization. Like learning about how like it really does take 6 months for someone to be really good at working on gameplay code, because there's so many moving parts, like so many stats and so the skills are. It's just like there's so many items. It's just crazy. And then once again, in working on graphics, it takes quite a long time as well to get familiar with everything and just understanding stuff like that. So yeah, as I said, like the programmers don't move around between specializations too much. And so because of that, I wouldn't say that like one thing is delaying another thing. It's more of a question of like my time training them in a certain area. So once I've trained them to be a graphics programmer, they're probably going to be a graphics programmer for a long time. So yeah.
Do you want to mention anything about a particle slider? I'm sure you've heard this.
People talk about that kind of thing. It's not ideal, and I also don't because like you can't just turn off 50% of the particles and expect a thing to look the same as it did before, or like even vaguely the same. And I think honestly that particle simulation is not nearly as much of a problem that as it was before. Now that we've optimized that to shit ton. So I think that I haven't really heard people calling for that as much recently as I did before. So we'll see after DX11 comes out. I think we'll see what people say. It's not ideal. Let's just say that I'm not trying to I actually really dislike what's okay. This is another one of those things where if people and this is like shadows, right?
Okay.
All the streamers turn shadows off, and it makes the game look really fucking ugly. And it really annoys me. That's the kind of thing that's like okay,
I actually recently turned shadows on after not playing it, and the shadows are amazing when I went through the labyrinth. I was like, holy shit, this is good.
It's way better, right? Like seriously, like okay, yeah. So yeah, this is what I'm saying. And like then this whole RuneScape mode thing, as people call it.
Oh, yep, I've done that. Yeah, when we had the flashback league, I just RuneScaped potato mode claymation land.
Right. The thing that really annoys me about that is that like beyond like okay, like maybe one level below what we let you set it to in the UI, like maybe you could make an argument for performance for that one, but anything below that is completely irrelevant. Like it does not change anything about performance. Like because the only thing that lowering it does is reduce the amount of GPU RAM that you're consuming, and every time you lower it another MIP level, it cuts off 50% of the RAM. So after cutting off 50%, like so you halve it, and then you halve it again down to medium, and then you halve it down to low, the equivalent of whatever low would be that we don't expose because we don't feel like it's really necessary. After that point, halving it again it's doing nothing for you. Like you're going from like
diminishing returns.
You're going from like 200 meg of GPU RAM consumed to 100, and it's like okay, well you've got like 2 gigs in your graphics card probably. So like, what are you even achieving here? Like you're achieving nothing. And it honestly doesn't affect performance in any way because memory bandwidth is already really GPU bandwidth is already going to be really low by that point. And so it's honestly it trolls me to see it. And like I would be tempted to prevent people from doing it if it wasn't for the fact that people would just get needlessly annoyed and it's just going to anger people for no real benefit to me. So whatever.
We're not programmers. I've set mine to one desperately trying to get any type of performance going in potato mode.
It honestly does nothing. Like as I said, you could maybe go like you can maybe make an argument, although I honestly really don't think it's going to help going one down from where we have it. But beyond that, it's like just a total wash. It just doesn't work.
So it is a situation where like an answer we've gotten from GGG before is you want to solve the problems, and particle sliders would be this last ditch effort.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. That's not my preferred solution because as soon as once you've added that, you can't take it away later. And what I would much prefer to be in a situation where you get the graphical fidelity without having to make any sacrifices. Because like imagine if we'd have added that before now, right? And then all these people would have set it to the lowest setting possible, and then now their performance would be like for many people it would be totally fine now to just have that all the way up. But because they're used to having it low or whatever, like they would just have it low. So it's one of those things where I just it's really shitty to set people's expectations too low. So that's the sort of annoying thing about it. But anyway, yeah, that's the situation.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be painful to see your creation and people are playing it in a toaster mode. They're like, "Oh, what game do you make?" "Oh, this game that somebody's playing with like Minesweeper." RuneScape.
All right, guys. I don't think we should take too much more time of Jonathan's time. Do you have anything else you want to add here near the end, Jonathan?
Not really. I mean, yeah, it was great being on the podcast. Like,
Yeah, we appreciate
yeah,
it.
it's just
I did
pretty
have
a
a
fun.
lot
quick
of fun.
question, a fun question. Do you talk this fast in real life, or are you just either like slightly nervous or excited? Because
No, I think I normally talk this fast. I didn't even realize I was talking fast. It's just
No,
just my natural pace.
you're doing really good. Like you're natural. in this.
Hopefully, I didn't like have too many ums and ahs and like that kind of thing.
don't listen to the podcast again.
Right. Well, I never do. I honestly, I cannot listen to myself in like
Yeah.
press interviews.
Well,
or
then you
anything. I
won't
hate-
notice it, and you're perfectly
Yeah.
fine.
You don't want to
listen
become a
us.
YouTuber then.
Yeah.
Yeah. But thank you very much for joining up, Jonathan.
Thank
It's
you for your
very very enlightening. Thank you very
Yeah.
much. We appreciate that. And guys, if you want to see the next podcast on Sunday, make sure to follow the channel. If you didn't catch the entire podcast, it will be uploaded to Hedgie's YouTube. You can find the VOD there. Once again, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah,
Thank
it was
you.
fun.